morning, folks. Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. What I thought we'd do this morning is we'd have a discussion about axes in general. And remember that when you are selecting an axe for yourself for use, you have to think about A, what environment are you going to be operating in and what's your reason for carrying that axe? Sometimes that will dictate the size of axe, hatchet, or belt axe that you decide to carry. Do you have conveyance? If you have conveyance, then you have the affordability of carrying a combination of things. And back in the days of the frontier, a lot of times the frontiersmen would carry some type of a belt axe or a tomahawk because they also had a larger axe in their train of horses during long hunts and things like that, or moving from settlement areas to new areas. They would carry the tools with them by pack train that they needed and carry smaller implements on their person that they may need just around camp to process something very quickly on the fly. And I think that's an important thing to understand. Is a large felling axe too big to carry or too cumbersome to carry with you all the time on your person? Well, that depends on your environment. If you are in the northern boreal forest somewhere where you've got to cut down large hug-sized trees, as Morse Katansky says, no, you better have a felling axe with you. If you're in the eastern woodlands, where you're only going to have to experience that dead winter cold temperature a couple of times a year, and maybe only a couple months out of the year it gets really cold enough to have big long fires and things like that if you don't have the right sleep gear, then maybe a smaller felling axe or a hunter's axe will do the job for you. If you live somewhere where you don't have to worry about any of that, then maybe a belt axe or a hatchet could be used for you all the time. Those are the things I want to discuss with you, and then again, what these axes will do for you in comparison to each other. So stay with me, guys, and we'll get started with what's on the blanket now. Okay, so real quick, let's identify and speak about the axes that we have here before we move on. And we'll start over on the far side with the bigger axes. This axe is the S.A. Wetterling's bush axe. This was designed by Les Stroud. You can see that this axe doesn't have a lot of use. It has some use, but it hasn't been used near as much as some of my other axes. The reason for that is I found out that this axe is not what I want to use in my environment. This axe has a very heavy duty head on it that's almost like a wedge in design. It's a lot different than the Scandinavian ground type axes generally are. It's more wedge shaped. So this axe, and it's very heavy, this axe would be great for splitting wood. It has a nice square hammer pole in the back of it for pounding stakes and things like that. So it's a very good design concept. The problem with this axe to me is the thickness of the head precludes it from being a good felling axe. So while I can use this axe to process wood, if I can find dead wood, I may not be able to use this axe as well for processing something if I need to cut down a standing dead tree or something of that nature. This may not be as conducive. Also, for what this head weighs, I believe the handle is a little bit short for me. Generally speaking, I want my axe to go from my armpit out to my cupped hand. And this one is about a couple inches short of that. That's not that big of a deal to me. This axe is plenty wieldable for me. It's just the head design doesn't make it conducive for what I like to do with an axe. And it is pretty heavy. It's not very well, as far as the grind of it goes, it's not real sharp. It's got more of a wedge to it. So for fine carving tasks with an axe, it may be more difficult with this than a general Scandinavian design axe. That's the main reasons that I don't carry this axe as much as I thought I would when we first picked it up. That doesn't mean this axe isn't perfect for the environment that you live in. This is my S.A. Wetterling's forest axe. This is a full-size forest axe. It fits perfect from my armpit to my cupped hand. It's got measurement markers burned into the back of it that gives me increments of 24 inches. It's about a 26 inch, 27 inch overall. I brought a measuring tape out here for you guys just so you could kind of compare things and see them visually. It's about 25.5 inches overall, and my span from my armpit to my cupped hand is about 25 inches. So that's just about perfect for me. It's got a lot narrower head design on it as far as the grind goes than the bush axe. If you look at them side by side, this one is a lot narrower here than this one is. So this one's more wedge shaped, more conducive to splitting, while this one is more conducive to chopping. But it will also do a fine job of splitting. So this is a good felling axe that will do splitting tasks for me as well as felling if I need to cut down a standing dead or a standing live tree, either one. Probably of all my axes, for a heavy-duty wintertime axe, this would be my preference for sure. And S.A. Wetterlings and Grantsford Brooks are very good axes. Most of the axes sitting here are one of those two brands. I'm not going to try to compare the two because there are some differences, but as far as the cost differences, I don't believe that the difference in quality or craftsmanship outweighs the fact of the differential in cost that there is between the two. I would buy an S.A. Wetterlings as long as I could get the model I wanted before I would buy a Grantsford Brooks for that reason alone. Okay, this is a fairly large axe, but it's smaller in length than the felling axe. It's about the same length actually as this bush axe. This axe happens to be a Condor. This is the Condor Greenland axe, and you can see this one is well abused. This axe has not seen indoors in over a year. This axe has been used by students. It's been abused by children. It's been used by instructors at the Pathfinder school. It's been left down at this camp for months on end for splitting and cutting firewood. It's got a very 18th century style design head on it that has not come loose yet in any way, shape, or form. And it's held a pretty good edge. We've only sharpened it one time in that year, and it still splits kindling and splits firewood like a champ. I can't say anything bad about this axe other than the steel is not the same quality steel as S.A. Wetterlings or Grantsford Brooks. This is a 1070 high carbon steel. It's not, doesn't have the carbon content that these other axes have, so it doesn't throw sparks near as well. The head's not as hard. Now, it may not stay sharp as long or have that razor sharp blade on it that you get on a Grantsford Brooks or a Wetterlings, but again, there's a huge price difference between this axe, and if you really worked hard at this axe, you could probably get a really fine edge on here that you could probably shave with. I've never worked on it that hard, to be honest with you. My testing of this thing has really been abuse testing to make sure that it was going to last, and there's no doubt in my mind this axe will last. It comes with a really nice leather mask. Not real fond of leather masks to begin with because they usually come undone. But Condor's leather work, bar none, is way better than Grantsford Brooks or Wetterlings as far as that goes for an axe mask. Okay, these two axes are what's called a hunter's model axe. And these are about a 19-inch handle. They're about 20 and a half inches, 20 inches overall, both of these. This one's 19. This one's right at 20, and this is called the 19-inch Hunter's Axe. This one is an S.A. Wetterlings, this one is a Grantsford Brooks. Now you can see both of these have been abused pretty good. This one's been abused by a buddy of mine for a long time, none the worse for wear. This one's been abused by me forever. You can see my markings on the back. The difference between these two axes really, as far as design goes, there's not a whole lot of difference in the design of the head, other than this one has a round pole, this one has a square pole, okay? The reason this one has a round pole is this one was made for beating the hide off an animal. It was made for separating that hide of an animal, and that's why it's got the round pole. So it's not near as good for pounding steaks as the square pole of the S.A. Wetterlings, but depending on your use and your environment and what you want to use the axe for, you may want this instead of this, or you may want this instead of this. I happen to prefer a hunter's type axe. If I'm in, less than the most extreme weather of Ohio, I can pretty much get away with that type of axe year round, and it does everything that I want it to do, from small tasks to fairly large. But it's going to be a lot more work and calorie expenditure to cut a tree down with this than it is with something like this. This head is twice as heavy, you have more inertia, you have to expend less energy, therefore it's going to be more calorie efficient and safer than an axe swinging like this if you are trying to process large wood. Okay, so the rest of these axes that I have over here as far as the axes go, and not belt axes, but hatchets, are all Grantsford Brooks models, and none of them have been used and abused too bad because I'm not that fond of them, to be honest with you. This one is a smaller axe. This one is about 14 inches overall. Again, this is a Grantsford Brooks. It's got a square hammer pole on it. It's got a pretty nice handle on it. It does have some heartwood and sapwood in it. That can be okay for you, but I'd rather have all sapwood in my handle and no heartwood. But if you've got a mixture of sapwood and heartwood in your handle, it's okay. What you have to be careful of is things like runoff and checkering, or runoff and checks. And it looks like there's kind of a check right here in this handle. It's not a crack, but it could very easily be. If I were buying an axe and I were selecting one axe, this would not be the handle that I would select because it's half heartwood and half sapwood, and it does have some areas that have potential split. You can also see it has runoffs all the way up the handle here that could also split out. I'm not real fond of that either. I like a nice straight grained handle. So if I were selecting this axe, this wouldn't be one that I bought off the counter if I had 10 to compare. Now the reason I do have this axe is because it's very good for iris. A smaller person, a person with smaller hands that has a little less strength, an axe like this will be really good for processing kindling and is a good mid-range axe, especially if you're carrying a smaller knife. And I think that is a really important topic to understand and discuss is what other tools are you carrying along with that axe? If you're carrying a good sized knife like the Pathfinder Scout that has a pretty good 6-inch blade on it, and you can do quite a bit of wood processing and fine carving with this, then it almost makes something like this unnecessary, and I would rather bridge that gap by going to something bigger like this that's going to be, okay, if I got to process fine kindling, I'll just baton my knife, but if I'm going to process bigger pieces of wood, I'm going to use a bigger axe. I don't want to use this. But if I'm carrying a smaller knife, or I'm a woman, or I'm a child, then this is a good happy medium in there for something that's not too big. This is about bedroll size. This is smaller. This will fit in your backpack or right on the outside of your backpack comfortably. But for a woman or a child, it's not a lot of weight to carry. This little axe here would be more of a kid style axe. And this has been used a little bit by my granddaughter, but not so much by anyone else. This is more of a crafting style axe. You're not going to split much with this except for fine kindling, and you can do that with your knife, like I said. The same thing with this one. This is more of a crafting style axe. This is a Gransford Brooks as well. Has a nice big heavy handle on it for somebody who's got big hands like I do. Much bigger than this. It has a little bit bigger head on it than this, but you don't have a lot of space between what you're cutting and your knuckles here. So you're not going to be doing any heavy duty chopping with this thing. You're going to be doing mostly fine carving tasks and processing small pieces of material with this. So I would just as soon do that with my knife and carry a bigger axe. That's just my personal opinion. Now, let's talk about belt axes and tomahawks for a minute. This is a belt axe that was typically carried along the frontier. This is like an 1812 style belt axe. Got a very, very small head on it. Got a really sharp grind to it. It has a little bit of a hammer pole in the back. It's got a very flat profile. Doesn't weigh a whole lot. Fits real nicely against a haversack or against a shooting bag. And it will process kindling very, very well. But again, to me, if I'm already carrying a large belt knife, I really don't need this. I'd rather have something like this that I can process bigger wood with if needed. If I'm carrying a smaller belt knife, or I don't have a belt knife, and Horace Kephart said in, I believe it was 1910, in one of his books, that many hunters didn't even carry a sheath knife because any game animal from a squirrel to a bear could be processed with a proper jackknife. So what he's saying in that text is that they didn't carry a belt knife per se, they carried a folding knife, and they relied on their hatchet to do any larger tasks. And there again, if you're not carrying a knife at all, a fixed blade type knife, and all you have is a folding knife or an SAK, then that would give you good reason to carry something smaller along these lines or something along this line. Now, the tomahawk is a completely different animal than an axe. And a tomahawk is not meant as a standalone tool. It's meant to be a companion to a larger axe like a felling axe. This would be on the horse or the conveyance. This would be on your belt for immediate use. And it's good for knocking out pine knots from trees, things like that, quick processing and limbing, tasks like that. You can take the head off, you can use it as a wedge, pound it with a baton. Of course, you can do that with your axe as well, but you can take this one off the handle to do it. You can also take this off the handle and use it for a skinning tool so that you have another sharp implement that you can skin with if you want to. And it's easy to replace the handle if something happens to it out of natural material, whereas an axe like this that's actually hung and not just pushed through the head and held by friction, it takes a lot more to replace that handle in the wild. So something like this is very conducive for carry because of those options, especially if you're carrying a smaller knife or you don't have a sheath knife at all. But many frontiersmen carried tomahawks. They also carried belt axes. And again, they used those for small tasks at hand, small tasks around camp, but they weren't cutting big trees down with them. They were cutting big trees down with felling style axes. They were using these things for processing smaller things like kindling. Okay? So again, It's all about what you want to carry, how much weight you want to carry, and what you're going to do with that axe in your situation. So let's look at a little bit of task with wood cutting, and we'll talk about what these axes are capable of and what they're not. Okay, so the next thing that we have to consider when we're talking about what axe we're going to carry is, what types of wood do we have in our area that we're going to have to process? And is that wood frozen or not? In this case, this is a slat of pine, but it's frozen solid. A smaller axe is not going to tackle this near as well as a bigger axe. Once I get it down to finer splits, obviously a smaller axe would do the job, but in this state, it's not going to. Something like this, which is a piece of solid oak, which is a heavy, grainy, dense wood, a smaller axe is not going to do near as good a job on this as a bigger one. So if I'm carrying a tomahawk, let's just say for my main tool, and I've got to tackle something like this, I'm going to have to get way out here on the edge and split it off. And it will split it off. There's no question about that. A tomahawk will do the job. No question. And you can see what I'm doing here is I have this axe out here so that if it comes down, I'm on my knees. So if this axe comes down or glances off, there's no way it can hit my body. Okay, so I can split that wood off easy enough with a tomahawk. No question about it. And I can get the job done. But I'm just going to have to work around the edges on the outside, because for the most part, I'm not going to get those things to split from the middle. So I'll have to work my way around the outside and kind of beaver chew my way in, and I can get the job done with a tomahawk easy enough. If I go to the center and try to split it, it's a whole different ball game now. All it's doing is bouncing off of that thing. But again, if I go to the outside, I can split chunks off of it all day. Okay, and that's what's important to understand. So using the tool the way it has to be used to get the job done is important as well. I can use a smaller tool, I just have to attack this a little different way. Okay, so let's take a piece of this white oak and take it in the middle, and we can use a bigger axe for that, easy enough, and I'll go ahead and use this condor axe. And I can split that right down the middle easy enough. So the bigger the axe, obviously, the less energy it's going to take to split that wood. The less energy it takes to process it, the less calories you're going to burn in the process. If I have to process a plank of wood like this that's frozen, I'm not going to stand it up and try to split it here. I'm either going to lay it down on a stump and split it here, or I'm going to lay it down on a side anvil here that I can get behind with my leg spread and split it here. Let me grab this. I'll grab this bush axe, and you can see that bush axe did not do a real good job of splitting that frozen wood as hard as I hit it. There we go. I had to take a pretty full swing on that to get that to split. But again, if I miss, I'm going into my anvil. I've got this out far enough that it's not going to slip through no matter what happens. This thing's not coming here. It's not going over here. It's going straight into this anvil, and that's what I want. Okay, let's talk about using a double anvil. And for this, what we're going to do is we're going to use the stump as an anvil and our axe basically to split off this wood without having to move our axe again. So we're going to take a swing like this. Once we get that inside, we can hold the axe still, move the wood just like this, and that will split it off for us. Instead of having to make more than one swing, we just split it down that way. Just like that. Okay. So if I don't want my wood flying everywhere, I can just take a piece of my rope, put a trucker's hitch in it basically, just like this, and tighten that down. Turn that around. take my axe. Okay. Now when I release my knot here, or release my trucker's hitch, I have a pile of firewood. All nice and neat and ready. If I got a couple pieces that are big, I want to split them down, not a problem. That one probably could be split again. That one there is not too bad. You can see I got plenty of firewood off of that, just out of those splits, okay? And it's all together. So now I just put it in my kerchief or whatever I'm using to carry my firewood. Even pick it up by the rope, take it right by the fire, dump it, and I'm done. Don't need bungee cords, don't need chains, don't need anything fancy, just a piece of rope from my camp. Paracord would work as well. Okay, if I'm processing smaller pieces of wood, now obviously a smaller axe is going to be the better tool for that. I can split that stuff right out easy enough with a small axe into kindling. But I can do the same thing with a bigger axe if needs be as well. Now I can use a bigger axe for that same task if I need to. I just have to be a little bit more accurate with my swings, but I can get those same splits with a bigger axe. Again, you know, white oak is a very grainy wood. The other thing I can do is I can take that piece and just tap it gently, just like that. Split it down with a bigger axe, just like that. I just have to be careful. Keep my fingers off to the side. I may even want to baton it in a little bit, like that, and then split it down. All of these things will work. What matters is your safety. If you can handle a big axe and you can do small chores with it, that's great. If it takes a smaller axe for you to do the smaller chores, like making feather sticks, like this, or processing finer kindling, then you need to carry a smaller axe. But again, everything is environmentally dependent. And everything depends on the wood that you have available to you to process as well. Is it hardwood? Is it softwood? Softwood is going to be much easier to work with a smaller axe, whereas hardwood is going to be much easier to work with a heavier duty axe like the Condor. Okay folks, well I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I appreciate you joining me for this short video today on axe use and axe selection. I appreciate your views, I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for me, for my school, for my family, for everyone affiliated with the Pathfinder School and Self-Reliance Outfitters. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks guys.